Thanks, Pankaj. Just a quick note of introduction. I'm with Cisco, but I spent the last 6 years before Cisco. I've been with Cisco for just over 2 years now. Before that, I was with Marvell Semiconductors in Silicon Valley for about 6 years, and prior to that, I was with startups that did chips. So I'm intimately familiar with the silicon industry. What I was going to talk about today was essentially the theme of what Cisco is doing in the area of networking, and more specifically, some of the things that we are driving out of here in India, and what our experience has been so far in terms of what works well, where's there room for improvement. Overall, our story has been extremely positive, and I just wanted to take a moment in essentially walking you through some of our experiences in that area. So most of you know Cisco as a networking company. We essentially pave the infrastructure for a lot of what you see with the internet today, both in enterprises as well as for service providers. But now that that battle has been won, now that the world has moved towards that architecture, we continue to innovate in essentially providing, in addition to basic networking capabilities, full platforms, including software that solve business problems. And the key takeaway here is that much of what we do is driven by technology innovation. We are trying to solve business problems creatively. The technology innovation for a company like us depends heavily on hardware innovation, and the hardware innovation in turn translates back into things that need to be done in the silicon, in the chips that power our platforms. Now, specifically in India, we've been here for a while, much like some of the other companies. Synopsys, mentioned their experience. We've had a very similar trajectory. We started out for labor arbitrage, started 15 years ago. But essentially what's happened is that in the last 4 or 5 years, we've essentially crossed the Rubicon. We've gone through some big transitions in terms of, number one, obviously the numbers speak for themselves. We have close to 5,000 engineering employees, almost 3,500 engineering employees with our partners. Overall, Cisco in India is almost 20,000 people, including our partners. But beyond the numbers, we've essentially crossed an inflection point where the focus has shifted from just doing engineering support and back-end stuff and sustaining to innovation. And along with the innovation, we've also created the business structures. Innovation cannot exist in a vacuum. We've created the business structures, full-fledged business units that are based here in Bangalore with P&L responsibilities. Essentially what that means is that we have the ability, for example, for my business unit, PABU, to be able to make product roadmap decisions for products that we build for the entire world. And what I'll try to translate back for you is, what does that mean in terms of where we are driving not just our own products, but the ecosystem around us. Real quick, in terms of some of the areas of innovation, I've just picked a few. We have a lot of innovations continuing in our core area of expertise, namely routing and switching. We've built a product called the ASR 901, which is a router that goes into base stations. We'll talk a lot more about it. We have a suite of products called MediaNet, which essentially focus on improving the experience of users when digital video is being transmitted over packet switch networks. We have a tremendous amount of investment in the whole area of data center in order to build scalable cloud solutions. Most of that work is being driven out of our center here in Bangalore. And finally, as you start to transmit voice and video over networks, you need a set of companion tools that can be used for example, analytics, recording video, and so forth. And we have a lot of work going on in that area under the umbrella of Cube. Now, the key theme that ties all of this stuff together is that there's significant software and hardware innovations in each one of these areas. And for each one of these platforms, there are specific requirements that we have for pushing the envelope on technology. And we work very closely with our silicon partners. In some cases, we design our own chips in making that innovation happen. And I'll take the ASR 901 as a case study to walk you through what that means. Sanjeev Keskar warned me not to have any block diagrams or anything technical, but as an engineer, I felt I really needed to, show you some very specific examples of what we've done and how we are working with our partners. So the ASR 901 is a very interesting product in the sense that this is the first product that has been entirely conceived, designed, and launched from India. Even the manufacturing support that was required for this platform was entirely done out of our center here in Bangalore. We launched this product 3-4 months ago. It's been in the works for about 18 months. And as I mentioned, there's several products like it that we are planning to launch over the next 2 years, but it's a very good case study for what we've been able to achieve and what we've driven our ecosystem to do, and where we've had good experiences and not so good experiences. But just to step back a little bit, Cisco has a very rich product portfolio. So how did we suddenly decide to build a certain class of products out of our center in Bangalore? What we decided was that it made sense for us to focus on markets that were developing faster in this part of the world than in the developed world. And specifically, we chose to focus on technologies for various kinds of, if you look at the technologies that are most applicable in India or in China, or just in general, a lot of the APAC regions, or even in South America, they center around the theme of broadband access, cloud-based services, and how the two come together to enable the next generation of applications. So we decided to focus in the area specifically for our business unit of broadband access. And there was a lot of talk in this morning's session around building products in India for Indian markets and so on. We actually have a very different, you can think of it as a contrarian perspective. We think it's important to build global products. We think that we need to build products that are world-class and for global markets. However, the rationale for designing the products here is that proximity to the markets here and the customers here allows us to factor in the requirements of both the customers here as well as the customers in the more developed parts of the world. So specifically for the ASR 901, I'll kind of let you read through all the bullets. The key takeaway is that when we started out, we were talking to service providers in this part of the world, all the usual suspects, Reliance Industries, et cetera, and we came up with a set of requirements that could not be satisfied with the technology that was available, not just in terms of the hardware, but also in terms of the building blocks, the components, the chips. And so we went through a fairly exhaustive process of figuring out what we needed to build. And then on top of that, we layered on what would be required for developed markets. And that's how we came up with the requirements for this platform. Now, I won't walk you through this hardware block diagram, but the visual analogy that I want to provide to you is, think of a car that's unassembled, without the skins. And in here, for this platform, there are 4 major silicon components: the L2, L3 switch, the PTP processor, the iOS control plane processor, and the TDM processor. All these components came from outside Cisco. Some of the folks that supported us on these are inside the room. But what we had to do was, for a lot of these devices, we had to drive the requirements. When we first started engaging with the partners, they didn't have what we needed. And we've essentially worked with them not just to define these platforms and these components, but also, in many cases, define where they need to go next. And I'll kind of spare you the gory details, but essentially the way in which we've gone about it is, think of it as it's hardware, software co-design. It's figuring out how to partition functions between different chips. It's figuring out how to partition functions between different software blocks. And ultimately, if we were to not drive it in that way, we would end up with a suboptimal product, either something that has higher power consumption, something that is more expensive, or something that doesn't have the level of performance that we required. So, we have a bunch of time for Q&A, and we'll touch on some of the themes of innovation and reverse innovation, and what does it mean to do products here, and what are some of the areas where Cisco is driving technology. But I want to conclude by giving you essentially a sense of where we are going. We are very aggressively planning to drive technology in the products that we are building today. And as part of this development of technology and products, we are essentially interlinked with our silicon partners. In some cases, we depend on them for innovation. They are more familiar with Moore's law and what's possible and what's not. They are driving, in some cases, the component technology roadmap. But working with them, we are in the process of defining the next generation of products. Two other quick ecosystem components that we believe are very vital for a company like us to prosper, especially for the products that we are doing here. One is the ability to do local contract manufacturing, especially for quick hardware prototyping. A lot of what I glossed over earlier was that when we are designing these complex technology platforms, many times the design that we do is not just paper and pencil or computer-driven analysis. We actually build prototypes, we characterize them in the lab, we then make tweaks to the design, do another round of prototypes and so forth. And this is an area where, I think enormous strides have been made in India, but quite frankly, compared to, let's say, what you would get in Silicon Valley today, I think there's lots of improvement that still needs to be made. And then finally, for products like this, there's a lot of work that's required for compliance, for certification, for eDVT, for mechanical DVT, and so forth. And we feel that that's an area where, again, the ecosystem here, companies like Wipro and others have come a long way. There's tremendous infrastructure that's being built up. But it could still do with considerable improvement, especially as we develop our next generation products. We're working with partners like them to help improve the infrastructure for faster turnaround and essentially to build up the capability to be able to qualify and validate compliance for complex products like this. All right, Pankaj, do we take a break here and then do questions?
I think we can take questions, two questions later, or you want?
Up to you. You're the moderator. All right. So I think we are running a little bit behind time. So what we'll do is, we'll transition over at this point and do the questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Partho. Thanks for keeping it so focused and short.